Yeah, yeah, no King's English, and we're not going to count your lords, we promise.
Dear Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this beautiful weather that you provide for us, that we might enjoy all the beauty around us that you create. For we know it all comes from you, and no matter what happens, you revive this world each year as you do our spirits and our lives. We thank you for the praise we've had here for Pastor Al, that he's showing recovery, and thank you for the beds that have been provided, and we ask you to continue to seek other beds for the mission people. We continue to attend teens who had a stroke. I believe, Lord, we thank you for the recovery that you're attempting to do with that team, and we hope, Lord, that team understands where that comes from, or that healing comes from only you, a great physician. We ask you to be with Eric. He's having tests, that they might be good tests, that they might have good surgery, and that you might guide and direct those surgeons and all the people involved in that situation. Ask you to bless our choir as they prepare tonight and deliver a message in song dealing with you, Lord. We thank you for all those things. Lord, I just ask you to be with each and every one of us. Show us your mercies and show us where we fight, where we fail you, and how we can better serve you. In your name we pray.
Amen. Thank you, Bruce. All right, let's go to the Lord and worship with the youth band. Let's all stand.
I choose to worship. I choose to bow. Though there's pain in the offering, I lay it down. Here in the conflict, when doubt surrounds, though my soul is unraveling, I choose you. I will praise you through the fire, through the storm, and through the flood. There is nothing that could ever steal my soul. You are always and forever my song. Build the altar right here and now. In the midst of the darkest nights, I won't for you are good, no matter what. In the joy of the suffering, I sing you now. Praise you through the fire, through the storm, and through the flood. There is nothing that could ever steal my soul. Valley, you are worthy. You are good when life is not. You are always and forever my song. When the enemy says I'm done, I lift your praises. When the world comes crashing down, I lift your praises high. Till the darkness turns to dawn, I lift my praises. I choose to worship. I choose you now. When the enemy says I'm done, I lift your praises. When my world comes crashing down, I lift my praises high. Till the darkness turns to dawn, I lift my praises. I choose to worship. I choose you now. I choose to worship. I choose you now. I will praise you through the fire, through the storm, and through the flood. There is nothing that could ever steal my song. In the valley, you are worthy. You are good when life is not. You are always and forever being my song. When the enemy says I'm done, I lift my praises. When my world comes crashing down, I lift my praises. choose to worship. I choose you now. Of the King, clothed in majesties, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, it trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And oh, we'll sing how great is our God. And age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, the Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? How great is our God? And oh, we'll sing how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing how great is our God. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And oh, we'll sing how great is our God. When you found me, I was so blind. My sin was before me, I was swallowed by pride. But out of the darkness, you brought me to your light. You showed me new mercy and opened up my eyes. From the day you saved my soul, till the very moment when I come home, and I'll sing, I'll dance, my heart will overflow. From the day you saved my soul, until the very moment when I come home. And I'll sing, I'll dance, my heart will overflow. From the day you saved my soul, from the day you saved my soul, oh, till the very moment when I come home. And I'll sing, I'll dance, my heart will overflow. From the day you saved my soul.
Thank you very much, youth band. I appreciate that. Youth, y'all have a good lesson tonight, good Bible study. Guys, out here, we're going to turn to Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to wrap that chapter up tonight. So this week is much, much easier than last week, and I'll tell you why. Last week, we had to kind of think ahead and see, okay, how does this apply? What does this prophecy mean? What is it even about? But for this part of the chapter, it's super easy. You want to know why? Because the angel does the interpretation for us. We don't have to wonder or guess. The angel simply tells us what we need to know. And so that's what we're going to pay attention to tonight. But I'm going to drop back and punt. We're going to pick up in verse number 13, and we're going to go back over the most central piece to all of this prophecy in the whole book of Daniel. And it's verses 13 and 14. These are the central pieces to the whole thing. It says, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days. Now when we look at that coming on the clouds, anytime you see something coming on the clouds, it's a sign of deity. It's a sign of godliness. It's a sign of, theos, of God, of heaven. And it says when he came on the clouds from heaven, it's like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days. Of course, this is a title or a way of saying the name Yahweh or the name God or Emmanuel or whoever, whatever name you know him by, Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nisi, whatever name you know him by, this is the Ancient of Days, the Creator, the one that's always been and always will be. And it was presented before him. That means that the Son of Man was presented before the Ancient of Days. And to him, the Son of Man, was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. I like that part because that is the central piece to this whole prophecy. The Son of Man coming on the clouds and dominion being given to him by the Ancient of Days, God the Father, giving to God the Son dominion to rule forever and ever and always. And I love that. So let's begin to pick back up in what we didn't cover last week, starting in verse number 15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. Now, is that the understatement of the year or what? Or the understatement of the millennia or what? If you saw something like this, how much would it disturb you? Let me just ask you this. Reading this, how much does it disturb you just reading it and trying to envision it in your mind? I'm like you, there's been plenty of times that I've read through this and I thought, my goodness, Lord, that is so magnificent and there's so much going on here. How can I even process that? When you talk about God's glory being revealed in wheels that are underneath his throne and that's just moving in all different directions at all times, and the wheels look like they're on fire. Now, I can spin the rubber and burn rubber on my truck, but I don't ever catch the wheels on fire, y'all. This is the glory of God. He's burning rubber on the wheels of the throne forever, and it's just burning solid fire. It's so magnificent that it makes my mind hurt just trying to think about it. What about you? But that's where Daniel was. He said, hey, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Now listen, who's hanging around in your vision? Do you think this was a person that was just hanging around with him inside his brain in the vision? Or inside this vision? Who's the identity of this person that he's going to and talking to and he's asking? It's not the Ancient of Days. It's not the Son of Man. It's an angel. That's right. It's an angel that's giving him all this vision. And he says, he goes to that angel. He says, I approached one of these who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. That's the first thing I would do, wouldn't it be you? If I saw this, matter of fact, when I read this, I start going to commentaries. I start going to other believers. I start going to other people. What does this mean? How many of you guys feel the same thing? When you approach this type of prophecy, you just get overwhelmed and you think, what does this even mean? You know, I did understand the Son of God, Son of Man. I did understand the Ancient of Days, and I really like that part. But the rest of it, I'm still a little bit fuzzy about. And it says in verse number 17, these great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. So this is the interpretation. So he told me, and he made known to me the interpretation of these things. Going back to verse 18. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. Now this is a bit problematic if you're looking at this passage, this one particular passage, to talk about a millennial kingdom or a 1,000-year reign here on earth, because that's not what it says. It says a kingdom that will last forever for all ages to come. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. So there was one particular beast within those 4 that was especially problematic for Daniel as he looked at it. You remember the other 3 beasts, could he describe them pretty well, right? What did he describe the first one as? Do you guys remember? Lion with wings, that's right. And we said that's Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire. We get that. We understand that. And then the next one, what did he describe it as? A bear, that's right. And a little bit about the bear, one side was lifted up higher than the other. And we talked about the Medo-Persian Empire, how the Persian Empire eventually was lifted up over the Medes and eventually became the dominant out of the Medo-Persian Empire. And so that makes sense. Then he came to the 3rd one, and the 3rd one was described as what? A leopard. And we talked about that leopard, and it also, the leopard had what? 4 wings, right? And what did the 4 wings we say? Well, the leopard and the 4 wings, what do they most likely represent? The leopard represents Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire, and then the 4 generals that took over after Alexander the Great. That makes sense. We can kind of make heads and tails out of that. How did he describe the 4th beast? The only thing he could say about it was there's no creature that he could really describe that made it anywhere near what he saw. So he just said, it's just a beast and it had iron teeth, y'all. I don't know about you, but as I think about that, I think that must have been one wild-looking thing for him not to be able to give any kind of description other than it had iron teeth, y'all. Whatever it touched, whatever it put its mouth on, it devoured, it chomped, it took it away. We decided that 4th one, if this parallels Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2, it's got to be the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was what? Represented in what metal? Iron, that's right, represented in iron. So we decided then that it must represent the Roman Empire. But there was something weird, something different that was going on with this 4th beast that caused Daniel even more problem than the rest of the vision. Because it says in verse number 19, then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast. Not just tell me. I wanted to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others. exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And remember, what part of the statue was the Roman Empire? Legs and feet, that's right. And the meaning of the 10 horns, he wanted to know what those 10 horns were that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell off, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth, uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. Now, a lot of people have looked at this passage over the years, and they have tried to squeeze in Antiochus Epiphanes IV into this passage. And I'll tell you a little bit about that guy. That guy, when the 4 generals took over for Alexander the Great, he was one of the 4 successors to those men. And so it would be the Seleucids, I think, or the Ptolemies, one or the other. But it was the ones that were based in Syria. And so that branch of the Greek government, this Antiochus Epiphanes IV took over. He was a general, and he was ruthless. This guy destroyed devout Christians, destroyed them, wiped them out, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of Christians died, or not Christians, but Jews died at the hands of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He was cruel. And then, not only was he cruel, he believed himself to be the god Zeus here on earth, incarnate. And so what he did is he went into the temple, the Jewish temple, Yahweh's temple. He went into the temple, completely took down all of the things that represented Yahweh, took away all of Yahweh worship, and set up an image of himself in the temple. Then he also began to slaughter and sacrifice pork on the altar there in the Jewish temple. Now, I don't know about you, but Jews, if you have a good understanding, you know they were forbidden from eating what? Pork. It was an unclean meat. And so it's an extra slap in the face that it was a pig that was sacrificed on the altar, and repeatedly, over and over. And Antiochus Epiphanes demanded that people worship him, worship Greece, worship him, and worship Zeus, or he would kill them. And he did. He slaughtered hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, and it was a pretty bad deal. Now, I will say, trying to push Antiochus Epiphanes IV into chapter 7 is extremely difficult. And there's some reasons why. Because as you look at the description of this little horn, you'll see that he has some characteristics that don't quite match up with Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, I will say that when you get into chapter 8, it really does look like Antiochus Epiphanes IV as been described there. So I would propose to you, and I think most scholars would propose to you, that there is a little horn that's mentioned in chapter 7 that is a distinctively different little horn that's mentioned in chapter 8. And I'll say that to say that it almost appears as if Daniel has been given a vision of what the end of time will look like as the Antichrist, this anti-God creature, will be on the face of the earth, and he will be even worse than the worst that we could ever imagine before. But when we get into chapter 8, it's almost like Daniel falls back into a truer vision of what's going to happen in the more immediate future. And so we'll look at that more next week, and we'll examine that more this week. But this week we're going to look at why I don't think this is Antiochus Epiphanes as we look at this passage. It says, verse number 21. Verse number 20. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on his head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. So what's happening here is there's 10 different kings, or 10 different people that are represented here. 3 of them fall at the hands of this one little horn, the one that gives the great boasts, spouting off great blasphemies. And so 3 of them fall, and the other 7 just fall in line and begin to serve this one. He says, I kept looking, and the horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. So in other words, there's some great things going on. Now this really could represent Antiochus Epiphanes at this point, because his only description is he's waging war against the saints and he's overpowering them. Well, that most definitely happened until the Maccabean revolts. So then if you look in verse number 22, though, it says, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Now, a lot of Jewish scholars will look at that and they will say that's when the Maccabean revolt took place. That's when the Jews took back control of the kingdom. And there was a period of time from the mid-100s BC until the Romans took possession in the 80s BC, I think is what the time frame was. There was a short period of time where the Jews actually ruled themselves. And they actually had kings back on the throne. The temple was back established. They had control of it. But they would say that that's that time that's put into place. But then in verse number 23, we begin to run into some problems if that's it. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. That certainly sounds like the Roman Empire. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. That's what we just talked about. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the highest one. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. And they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. So if you look at that literally, it would be one period of time, another period of time, and then a half a period of time. It would look like it would be 2.5 years, would be a pretty straightforward observation of that. But we're not positive, so we can't make that assertion to be absolute. Well, that is one interpretation, but I find that as to be straightforward, it would be a time, a times, which would be another time, and a half a time. Now, if it is 3.5 years and we try to make that the tribulation period, we run into problems, and we'll see why. It says a time, times, and a half a time, but the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty of the dominion and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom. There's another problem with this being the millennial kingdom. It's another problem with it being the tribulation period. And all the dominions will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So, as we look at this, there have been multiple interpretations of exactly what this means. Now, I want to offer to you some problems with a couple of those. If this is speaking of the tribulation period, all right, if we're looking at this from a dispensational viewpoint, and we believe that there will be a rapture of the church, then there will be 3.5 years of tribulation, or good times, and then 3.5 years of bad times, and the Lord will come back. We're on the same page, right? All right, so if there's 3.5 years of bad times at the end of the tribulation, we run into a little bit of a problem, because it says in verse number 21, I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. If the saints are on the earth during this time, times, and a half a time, then that makes it pretty hard to look for a rapture. And that would be the reason why historical premillennials would look at this and they would say, that's why we don't believe there is leaving before the tribulation period. We see them as being given over into the hands of the Antichrist. And so there's a problem there with that. But dispensationalists would believe, and here's the argument against that. Okay, here's what happens. The rapture takes place, the saints are gone. Then there's a revival on earth, and then there's more saints that are made, and they're the ones that are given over to the hands of the Antichrist during this 3.5 years period of time. I want you to understand, as we look at this text, the only way it says either one of those things, based on what's written right here, is if we come into this text with a theological viewpoint. Would you guys agree with me on that? The only way that this text in particular would say either one of those things is if you already believe that's the way the end of the times will work out when you come to this text. Can we agree on that? So people that are historical premillennial, they would say, there's the proof. The saints are still on the earth. Folks that would be dispensational premillennial, they would say, see, that's after the rapture. But only because that's what they believe is going to happen at the end of times when they come into this text. But as for us, the angel is pretty vague, isn't he? He gives some very specific things, but he just kind of leaves us hanging. And at the end of that, Daniel finds himself very sick, very worried, very ununderstanding of what really just went down. So, a few key points that I've got. Verse 15, these are point number 11 on your notes, which is verse number 15. These are the things that God wanted us to glean from Daniel's vision. This is the important thing that we need to understand. Starting in verse number 15, what the angel shows us, that's what he wants us to see. And if you'll ever notice that anytime people are really pressing to find out what happens at the end of time, how explicit is it in any one given place exactly how everything's going to go down when the Lord is pressed and asked? How forthcoming is he with all those details? He's not very forthcoming, right? He wants us to keep our mind on the big picture. So if we come to this passage and we're looking and we're saying, oh, we've got to know exactly what the beast is and where he is, and we've got to know exactly if this is Antiochus Epiphanes or if this is the Antichrist or if this is a tribulation period of time, or if that's what we're coming here looking for, then I think we've missed the forest for the trees. The point here is the Ancient of Days is the only one who is worthy to have his Son sit on his right hand, and he's the one that gives him dominion for an everlasting kingdom. It's not just 1,000 years. It's not for 70 years. It's not for it's for everlasting. And so that's the main point that the angel and that the Lord wanted us to get from the vision to Daniel here. Now, we can speculate, and we can come up with some really good speculations as to everything that's going on in this chapter, can't we? And I imagine we all have some theories, don't we? But at the end of the day, we have to agree that their theories are their speculation, and they are a compilation of things that we bring in from a lot of other places that we bring a few verses here and there to put them together. So I would just caution, be scared, be courteous to the text in that you just allow it to say what it says here in Daniel at this point. Any questions or comments? Miss Cinda. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I agree with that. Well, right. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. And I would caution, though, Miss Cinda, for all four of those viewpoints that I gave you on that handout, all four of them can formulate some really great arguments that are a compilation of scriptures from all over the Bible. and they can prove their point through other scriptures on the Bible. And so I think that's why I'm expressing caution, because I have heard an all-millennial, after they get done talking, I'm like, yeah, that's what I am. I have heard a post-millennial, believe it or not, give arguments for post-millennialism, and they were bringing scriptures to light left and right and showing them. And at the end of that, I would think, yeah, that sounds right. And I have done the same exact thing for historical premillennial, and I have thought, they've got a good point. They and I felt that way. And as I said, all my life growing up, I was, taught, even using Revelation, premillennial, all-millennial, and post-millennial make great scriptural arguments. And I think my point being is, Scripture does interpret Scripture where God wants to be specific. But when God's pressed on an issue, not just here, Daniel wanted to know what was going on. So did the disciples. Matthew chapter 24, they're saying, God, how's this going to go down? And he gives them some very specific things, but at the end of the day, we're left thinking, okay, that could really be any point in time. When Paul teaches the Thessalonians about what it's going to look like when the Lord returns and the second coming comes, it's the same thing. Yeah, there's some very specific things, but that could really fit any of the four systems just about. And so at the end of the day, I think that all four of those systems are just that. They're systems. And yes, text should interpret text, but if we come to any of these things thinking that our system is the right one and interpreting this passage through that system, that's when we've got the problem. And so I would say, probably from studying, I have come to the conclusion, I don't think I'm ever going to figure it out. I'm just as confused after reading lots and lots of books as I've ever been. And I've read Ryrie. I've read Hagee. I've read lots of people from lots of different points of view. And I'm telling you, some of them got me convinced by the end of that book until I read another book. Point being, go back to the Baptist faith and message. What do we believe? Jesus, in his own time, at the appropriate time, will return for his bride. And that's what we've got to keep coming back to. When Jesus returns, that's completely 100% up to him. And you know what the great thing is? I don't have to know that. I don't have to know the birth pains, even though that they're there and I can see them. Look, here's the beautiful thing. Jesus himself didn't even know. Now, this is God incarnate in man, and he tells me, I don't know. Only the Father knows the time and the date and the place. And so if Jesus doesn't know the time and the date, then I think the most important thing for me to remember at all times is that he's coming back. Does that make sense? He does. He does. So read those signs, Brother Don. All right, so let's go through those. The moon will be darkened. We're talking about an eclipse, right? All right, so an eclipse, then what's the next one? So stars will fall, and then earthquakes. Does that sound about right? Earthquakes, and what else? There you go. So what we find is an eclipse, stars are going to fall in earthquakes before Jesus' return, right? We've been seeing eclipses, stars falling, and earthquakes for millennia. And the point being is when Jesus does return, everybody's going to know. We won't miss it. It's going to be loud. The trumpets are going to sound. Up until Jesus' actual return, all the other signs, They're pretty ambiguous. They're signs that we see on a day-to-day basis. At any point in the time around the world, you can see an earthquake any day. You can see, shooting stars or stars falling from heaven. You can see eclipses, all those sorts of things. The point being, though, when Jesus really wants to get specific and he wants to really say, you won't miss it because when I come, I'm going to be coming on the clouds. When I come on the clouds, a trumpet's going to sound. The dead in Christ shall rise. All these things, we won't miss those. But up until then, the identity of the Antichrist, tribulation period, all these sorts of things are... Okay. There you go. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There you go. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and actually Nero did that too during Neroian persecution. AD 70, when the temple was destroyed, there were pagan sacrifices in the temple before it was destroyed as well. So what you're saying, and what I wrote down as you were going through all that, persecution, absolutely. False prophets, absolutely. Even in John, he says in 1 John, the spirit of Antichrist is among us already, and there have been many Antichrists. And because people have, even way back then, people were so worried about, is this the Antichrist or is that the Antichrist? And I think when John was pressed on it, John just said, hey, look, there's always Antichrist here. And here's the thing, if there is a literal one-man Antichrist that's going to be here on the earth right before Jesus comes back, well, then there always has to be one, because even Jesus doesn't know when he's going to come back. So the devil has to be prepared 24/7. There will always be an Antichrist ready, prepared, and ready to rock. And so, John covers that. So false prophets, that absolutely, we see that all the time. Sin's rampant. Oh my goodness. Has sin ever been more rampant? Yeah, it has. Ever since Jesus died on the cross, sin's been just as rampant as it is right now. It's pretty bad. Now, as our nation goes, it's worse now than it's ever been. But, man, our nation is a drop in the bucket compared to the whole world. And so sin's been rampant for the whole time. No love. People's love will wax cold. I see that all the time, don't you? And then the kingdom coming. So here's the one thing out of all those things that's not ambiguous is when Jesus actually does return. That part's very specific. The trumpet will sound, come on the clouds, and we'll know. Here's the thing. When Jesus comes back, we're not going to miss it. That's what the important message that Paul had for the Thessalonians. You have not missed it. You're not going to miss it. Our people won't pass away before we see the kingdom of heaven coming. And he's not just talking about that church in Thessalonica. He's talking about all of us. All of us as Jesus' bride. We're not going to miss it. We'll know it when it happens. Does that make sense? I know that it's a disappointment if you follow one of those four schools of thought. It's a disappointment not to have that school of thought taught and to say that there are other people that have very good, valid points. I know that can be disappointing, but what it is, it's a challenge. It causes you and me both to make sure we know what we know and why we know it, and we're solidified in what we know. And if we can't be solidified in what we know, then we back up and we say, here is the one thing we can know. And that's what we as Baptists all agree on in Jesus' second coming. Amen? All right. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, we're going to move on. I know. Yeah. And here's the thing, Brother Don. We tend to live in echo chambers when it comes to our theology. We listen to people that have the same theological viewpoint as us. So you'll listen to John MacArthur. You'll listen to Charles Ryrie. You'll listen to people that you trust that are going to give you the correct point of view. Now, here's the thing. There are a whole lot of great godly people that maybe don't view it that way, but are worth a listen, and they will challenge you to decide whether or not you truly believe every aspect of that theological point of view or not. So I would invite you, listen to some guys that maybe are not dispensationalists. Listen to historical premillennialists. I'll give you a really good historical guy, Bob Utley. He's really good Bible teacher. He's even got a YouTube series that you can listen to, and he preaches through the book of Daniel, chapter by chapter. He's solid. I enjoy listening to his point of view because he doesn't get bogged down in any one of those four views. He points out the errors in all of them. So he would be a good one to listen to. There are plenty others that are out there too. All right, so if there are no other questions or comments, I'm going to encourage those that are not members. We're getting ready to talk and discuss on reopening, and I'm going to call us into business. So if you're not a member, we would excuse you at this point, or you're welcome to stay and listen, but as far as discussion goes, the discussion and questions and comments will be designated towards members alone.